Hey, welcome back. And if you are brand new here, welcome for the very first time. You picked a good day to show up. This channel exists for one reason, to tell you stories that remind you who you are, inspire your heart, and add more values to you. And that is why I recommend that you watch to the end. It is a Tuesday evening in the middle of October. The kind of evening where the sky can't decide between gray and dark blue, and the wind has just enough bite in it to make you pull your coat tighter without thinking. The streets of downtown Chicago are packed with people rushing home. Nobody is paying attention to anyone else. That is the thing about a city full of millions. You can vanish completely and not one person will notice. Now, picture a boy. He is small, maybe 7, maybe 8, though the fear on his face makes him look younger. He is standing near the entrance of a coffee shop on the corner of Michigan Avenue and East Wacker Drive, wearing a navy blue school blazer with a crest on the breast pocket. The kind of blazer that tells you immediately that whoever this child belongs to, they have money, real money. He has on neat gray trousers, polished shoes that are now scuffed at the toe, and a little backpack that looks far too heavy for his small shoulders. His hair, dark brown and slightly wavy, is stuck to his forehead from crying. He is crying, quietly, the way children cry when they've been doing it long enough that the loud part is gone and only the shaking remains. Nobody stops. Hundreds of people walk past him. A man in a suit nearly trips over him and keeps going. A woman on her phone steps around him like he is a piece of furniture. A group of tourists walk in a cluster around him without breaking stride. Not one person stops. And then, she does. Her name is Maya Osei, 26 years old. She works as a junior graphic designer at a mid-sized agency 3 blocks away. She is tired, you can tell by the way she is walking, that particular exhausted shuffle that belongs to someone who has been staring at a computer screen for 9 hours and is dreaming of their couch. She has a canvas tote bag on one arm, a takeout coffee in her other hand, earphones in, and she is absolutely, completely, 100% not looking for anything other than the nearest train station. But she sees him. She almost doesn't. Her eyes drift past him the way anyone's would, but something pulls her back. Maybe it is the sound, the quiet, barely there sound of a child trying very hard not to be heard. She stops walking. She pulls out one earphone. She looks properly this time. And in that one moment, that tiny, unremarkable Tuesday evening decision to stop, Maya Osei changes the entire course of her life. She has no idea. She doesn't know that this small boy in the navy blazer is named Eli. She doesn't know that his full name is Elijah James Whitmore III. She doesn't know that his father, a man she has never met, never seen, never even heard of, is sitting in a private office on the 47th floor of a skyscraper less than a mile away, surrounded by advisors, and that in approximately 4 minutes he is going to realize his son is missing. She doesn't know any of that. She just sees a crying child, and she stops. What happens next, in the weeks, months, and ultimately the years that follow, is one of those stories that sounds too extraordinary to be true. But it is true, every word of it. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about a lost boy and a kind woman. This is a story about what happens when the universe decides you have earned something you never asked for. Before you continue with the story, please subscribe now, share, and kindly comment where you are watching from. Maya Osei had not been having a good year. To understand what she did that evening, and why it mattered as much as it did, you need to understand something about who Maya was. Not the version of herself she showed to the world, but the one she carried around privately, the one made up of small defeats and quiet perseverance. She had grown up in a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago called Bronzeville. Her parents, Emmanuel and Grace Osei, both originally from Accra, Ghana, had moved to Chicago before she was born with the particular fierce ambition of immigrant parents who believe completely in the promise of hard work. Her father drove a city bus for 22 years. Her mother cleaned offices in the evenings and on weekends. They were not poor, not in the way the word is usually used, but they were the kind of family that knew at all times exactly how much was in the bank account. They were the kind of family where every purchase was a decision, not an impulse. Maya had grown up watchful. She noticed things most people missed, the small details of a face, the way a room changed when someone walked in, the color of the light at a particular hour of the afternoon. Her art teacher in high school had said she had the eye of a painter, which was probably true, but it was also the practical eye of someone who had learned early that resources are limited and attention is one of the most important ones. She had won a partial scholarship to study graphic design at the Illinois Institute of Art. The rest had been loans, student loans that were, at 26, still very much her constant companion. She lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Pilsen that she could barely afford. She ate out once a week, if that. She sent money home to her parents every month, not because they asked her to, but because they had spent so long sending every spare cent toward her that the idea of not giving back made her feel physically ill. She had been at the design agency, a place called Forge Creative, for 2 years. It was fine, not great, not terrible. Her boss, a man named Derek Paulson, was the kind of person who praised mediocre work loudly and ignored good work quietly. Which meant Maya, who produced genuinely excellent work, was perpetually underpaid and undervalued. She had applied for a promotion 3 months ago. She had been told the timing wasn't right. The person who got the promotion instead had been at the agency for 8 months less than her, and, as far as Maya could tell, had never once designed anything that made her feel a single thing. She was tired of it. Tired in a way that was starting to become something else, something heavier. Not depression exactly, but its anxious cousin. The feeling of running on a treadmill that keeps getting slightly faster. The feeling that you are doing everything right and it is somehow not enough. She had been walking home that evening thinking about whether she should quit her job. Not dramatically. She didn't do things dramatically. She was the kind of person who made pro and con lists, who thought things through carefully, who believed in measured decisions. She had been running numbers in her head. How many months of rent she had saved, whether she could freelance, whether she was good enough. That last one, the cruelest question, the one she had been turning over since she was a teenager. She was so deep inside her own head that she almost missed him. Almost. She pulled out her earphone and crouched down in front of the boy. She did it the way you do with animals and children, slowly, making herself smaller, bringing herself to his level. "Hey," she said. Her voice was low and calm, though her heart had picked up pace. "Hey, are you okay?" He looked at her. His eyes were remarkable, dark gray, almost unusual, rimmed red from crying. He shook his head, a tiny, dignified shake. "No." "Are you lost?" she asked. He considered this for a moment with the seriousness of a child who understands that words mean something. "I think so," he said. His voice was steadier than she expected, a little formal, like a child who had been taught to speak carefully. "Okay," said Maya. "That's okay. Being lost is okay. We can fix lost." She gave her her most straightforward smile, not the big performative kind, but the small, honest kind. "My name is Maya. What's your name?" "Eli," he said. "Hi, Eli. How old are you?" 8.5. 8.5. Very important to count the half. She sat back on her heels. "Do you know your parents' phone number, Eli?" He bit his lip. "My dad's, but I don't have a phone. I left it in the car and the car drove away without me noticing." He said this last part with a very specific 8-year-old devastation, not hysterics, but a deep personal affront. He had been betrayed by a car. "Okay," Maya said again. "Can you tell me your dad's number and we can call him?" "I'm not supposed to give that to strangers," Eli said. Maya nodded. "That is a very smart rule. Your dad taught you well." She paused. "But I'll tell you what. How about we go inside this coffee shop here and we tell the people inside what happened, and maybe they can call the police for us. The police can find your dad. Does that sound okay?" Eli looked at the coffee shop window. He looked back at Maya. He studied her face for a long moment with those gray eyes, with a seriousness that was almost unnerving in an 8-year-old. Then he nodded. Maya stood up and held out her hand. He took it without hesitation, small fingers warm despite the cold, and she led him inside. The manager of the coffee shop, a tall woman named Pat with reading glasses pushed up on her head, took one look at the situation and immediately clicked into gear. She called the police. She brought Eli a hot chocolate that he accepted with a quiet, formal thank you. She brought Maya a coffee refill she hadn't asked for. While they waited, Maya sat across from Eli at a small corner table. He drank his hot chocolate carefully, both hands around the cup. "Is your dad going to be scared?" Maya asked. "Very," Eli said, without any particular drama, just a fact. "He worries about me a lot." "That means he loves you a lot." Eli considered this. "He does," he agreed. "Then, he works too much, though." Maya smiled at her coffee cup. "A lot of dads do." "He says it so we can have good things, but I think the best thing would be if he came home for dinner." He said it the same way he said everything, carefully, as if he had been thinking about it for a while and now decided it was accurate enough to say out loud. Maya looked at this child, this extraordinarily composed, oddly heartbreaking child, and felt something shift in her chest. She didn't know the father, she didn't know the situation, but she recognized the sentence. She had said a version of it herself as a kid, about her own mother who worked evenings. The best thing would be if they just came home. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "No," he said. "We were supposed to have dinner, but then I got lost." "Do you like grilled cheese?" He looked at her. "It's my favorite." Maya flagged Pat down and ordered a grilled cheese from the small kitchen behind the counter. It arrived just as the two police officers did, a young woman and an older man, both professional and kind. They asked Eli his full name. Eli told them. Their expressions barely changed, but Maya noticed the flicker, a very brief moment of recognition that passed between them when they heard the name. She didn't think much of it at the time.
His name was James Whitmore. Not James Whitmore Jr., not James Whitmore II. He was simply James. He had dropped the formal designation years ago because it felt like wearing someone else's suit. His father, James Whitmore Sr., had built Whitmore Capital from nothing in the 1970s, a private equity and real estate firm that, by the time James inherited it at 31, was worth somewhere in the region of $400 million. In the decades since then, James had grown it into something larger, much larger. The number most people cited when they talked about James Whitmore was 2.3 billion. He hated that number, not because it wasn't accurate, it was, roughly, but because it flattened everything else. It made him a number instead of a person. It made every interaction a transaction. It made every woman he had ever dated wonder, before anything else, what this might mean for them financially. He was 38 years old. He was not, despite what the financial press sometimes suggested, a cold man. He was a contained man, which was different. He had learned early that emotion in a boardroom was weakness, and the lesson had calcified into a kind of personal policy. He was precise, he was direct, he was scrupulously fair. He had a reputation among his employees for being exacting but never cruel, which was the best thing you could say about a boss in his position. He had been married once to a woman named Claire, who was lovely and intelligent and had ultimately, after 6 years, told him that she felt like she was married to a corporation. She had meant it kindly, which made it worse. They had parted on civil terms. The only thing either of them fought about was Eli, not in a bitter way, but in the way two people fight when both of them love something too much to be logical about it. They had eventually agreed on a shared custody arrangement that worked, mostly. Claire had since remarried a landscape architect named Tom who was warm and easy and present in all the ways James wasn't. James liked Tom, which he found mildly irritating. He had one fear in the world that he couldn't logic his way around, and that fear was something happening to Eli. Eli was there was no other word for it. His son was the axis around which his entire emotional life rotated. Every decision he made, every deal, every late night in the office, had Eli somewhere in the calculation. He worked so they could have a good life. He built things so Eli would have something solid to stand on. He knew intellectually that what Eli actually needed was more of his time and less of his empire. He knew this. He was working on it in that way that busy, driven people work on things, slowly, imperfectly, with enormous intentions and a calendar that kept getting in the way. On the evening of the Tuesday in October, James had made what turned out to be a catastrophic mistake in the landscape of small decisions. His driver, his regular driver, a man named Curtis who had been with him for 11 years, had been scheduled to pick Eli up from his after-school tutoring session and bring him to James's office building. From there, they were supposed to go together to dinner. Simple, routine. James had done it a dozen times. What nobody had accounted for was Eli's particular habit of stopping to look at things. Eli was a noticing child. He noticed things the way his father noticed things. Details, anomalies, interesting little corners of the world. He stopped at fire hydrants that had interesting rust patterns. He stopped to watch pigeons fight over a piece of bread. On this particular evening, he had stopped on the sidewalk to look at a street artist drawing a chalk portrait and had, in the time it took Curtis to get out of the car and walk around to open the passenger door, simply wandered away. 3 steps became 10, 10 became half a block. By the time Curtis looked up, Eli was gone. Curtis, panicked, had called James. James had been in a meeting with 3 senior partners and the CFO of a company they were considering acquiring. He had stepped out. He had listened to Curtis, who sounded absolutely devastated, explain what happened. And then James Whitmore, a man who prided himself on never losing his composure, had gone very, very still in the way that a person goes still when their body is preparing for something overwhelming. He had his security team mobilized within 4 minutes. His assistant was on the phone with the Chicago Police Department within 7. By the time Maya had walked Eli into the coffee shop, James had a team of 4 security personnel on the street, 2 police liaisons on the phone, and was himself in the back of a car moving toward the area of the city where Eli had last been seen. He was not calm. He was doing a very convincing impression of calm, which was something he had practiced for so long it had become almost real. But underneath it, underneath the clipped sentences and the precise instructions and the controlled voice, he was terrified. When the police officer called his cell phone and told him that his son had been found, that he was safe, that he was in a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue eating a grilled cheese sandwich with a young woman who had found him on the street, James closed his eyes for a full 3 seconds. Then he told his driver to hurry. The coffee shop was warm and amber-lit when James walked in with 2 members of his security team, large, quiet men in dark coats who made the small space feel suddenly smaller. The police officers were still there. Pat, the manager, was behind the counter. And there, in the corner, was Eli. He was fine. He was completely, entirely, visibly fine, sitting with both hands around an empty hot chocolate mug, talking to the young woman across the table with the animated seriousness of a child who had found an interested audience. He looked up when the door opened, and the relief on his face, the relief of seeing his father, was the most complete thing James had ever seen. "Dad," Eli said. James crossed the room in about 4 strides. He crouched down and put his hands on Eli's face, both palms framing it, and looked at him the way you look at something you were afraid you had lost, checking, making sure. "You're okay," James said. It wasn't a question. "I'm okay," Eli confirmed. "Maya found me. She got me grilled cheese." James exhaled. A long, controlled exhale that contained, if you knew what to listen for, about 45 minutes of sheer terror. He pulled Eli into a hug that Eli accepted with the patient tolerance of an 8-year-old who has decided he is too old for public affection, but is willing to make exceptions. Then he looked up. Maya was sitting across the table, her canvas tote on her lap, holding her coffee cup and looking at the wall with the very deliberate expression of someone who has decided the most polite thing to do is not stare at an emotional moment. She had a kind face, that was his first thought, an honest face, the kind of face that looked exactly like it was, which in James's world was rarer than he would have liked. He stood up. "You found him," he said. She looked at him then. "He kind of found me. He was already standing outside. I just stopped." "Nobody else did." She glanced toward the street, toward the window. "No," she agreed, "they didn't." James studied her for a moment. She wasn't nervous, which surprised him, Most people, when they first registered who he was, and people usually registered it within about 30 seconds, the recognition moving across their faces like a light being switched on. This woman looked at him the way she would have looked at any other parent, with the particular mild wariness of someone who has done a stranger a favor and now trying to figure out how to exit gracefully. She didn't know who he was. The realization landed with an oddness he couldn't immediately name. It had been, genuinely, he had to think about it, years since he had met someone in that condition. "I'm James," he said. "Maya," she said. She nodded at Eli. "He's a great kid, very composed. He told you your cooking isn't as good as the grilled cheese here." James looked at Eli. "Did you?" Eli, unrepentant, shrugged. "It's true." Something happened on James's face then, a small fracture in the contained expression, something that might, in different circumstances, have become a smile. He pressed his lips together instead. He turned back to Maya. I want to do something, to thank you properly. This isn't... You can't know what it would have meant if... He stopped. The sentence had gotten away from him, which didn't happen. He started again. Would you give me your address? I'd like to send something. Maya's expression became slightly guarded in the way that all sensible women's expressions become guarded when a stranger asks for their address. That's very kind, but it's really not necessary. I didn't do anything anyone wouldn't have done. Most people didn't, James said quietly. That landed. She looked at him for a moment. There was something in his voice, not manipulation, not performance, just the plain truth of it. Most people walked past his son. I'm really fine, she said. Just get him home. It's a school night. She smiled at Eli. Nice to meet you, Eli. Don't wander off next time. I was looking at the chalk art, Eli said, with the reasonableness of someone who believes context absolves them of responsibility. Next time, tell an adult first. Okay, he said. He paused. Then, with enormous 8-year-old sincerity, thank you for the grilled cheese, Maya. Any time, Teeted. She got up, slung her tote over her shoulder, and left. James watched her go. The police officers were wrapping up their notes. His security team was standing by the door. Eli was pulling on his coat. James stood there for just a moment longer, watching the amber light of the coffee shop window and the dark street outside, where Maya was already gone, absorbed back into the crowd of thousands of people going home. He thought about asking Pat, the manager, if the woman had paid her bill. She had. He thought about asking if she had left a name. She had not, only a first name, which she had given to Eli. He had very little to go on. That should have been the end of it.
Before you continue with the story, please subscribe now, share, and kindly comment where you are watching from. James Whitmore was not, by nature, a man who let things go. In business, this was one of his greatest strengths. He was relentless in the way that only certain kinds of people are. Not aggressive, not bulldozing, but steady. He stayed on things. He paid attention. He followed threads until they reached their conclusion. It took him 6 days to find her. Not because it was difficult, it wasn't particularly given his resources, but because he wanted to be careful. He was aware, at all times, of the particular weight of who he was and what his presence in someone's life could mean. He didn't want to be a disruption. He wanted to do something appropriate. He just needed to know enough to do it right. He found out her name through the police report. Officer Maria Santos had noted the full name of the civilian who had assisted. Maya Osei, 26, designer, Chicago. From there, he had her employer within about 15 minutes. Forge Creative, junior graphic designer, 2 years. He had his assistant pull her portfolio online, which was publicly available on her design website. James had looked at it himself, not because he needed to, but because he was curious about her in the way he was sometimes curious about particular people. He wanted to understand who she was. What he found surprised him. The portfolio was exceptional, not in the flashy way of someone trying to impress, but in the way of someone who was genuinely, quietly skilled. Her work had a particular quality, a precision of feeling, as if she was able to make you feel something specific with a color combination or a layout in the way a good sentence makes you feel something specific with its rhythm. It reminded him, oddly, of music. There was a logic to it underneath the beauty. He looked at her employer's website after that.
He looked at the kind of work Forge Creative produced. He looked at the names of the senior designers credited on their biggest recent campaigns. Maya Osei's name was not among them. He sat with that for a moment. He could send flowers, he could send a gift basket, he could write a check. He had done that before for people who had helped him, and it had always landed well, though he understood it wasn't the right move here. This was not a financial transaction. This was something else. He thought about what Eli had said in the car on the way home, once the terror of the evening had dissolved into normalcy. She was really nice, Dad. Not in the fake way, the real way. Eli was, among his other qualities, an extremely accurate judge of people. James had noticed this early. His son had an almost unsettling ability to identify pretense. He trusted Eli's read completely. He thought about what he had seen in her portfolio. He thought about the face she'd made when he offered to send something to her at her address, that particular combination of genuine deflection and mild wariness. She wasn't trying to get anything from him. She hadn't even asked his last name. He had an idea. It wasn't the most conventional thank you, but he thought it was right. He called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was the creative director and co-founder of one of the most respected design firms in the country, Webb & Associates, headquartered in Chicago with offices in New York and London. They didn't advertise. They didn't have to. Their clients included 3 Fortune 100 companies, a major international museum, and a tech company whose brand redesign had been covered in every major design publication for 2 straight years. Getting a meeting at Webb was the kind of thing that young designers dreamed about. Getting a job there was something else entirely. James and Marcus had known each other for 15 years. They had been at the same business school, though they had never been close friends. More than that, James's firm had been an early investor in Webb & Associates when Marcus was just starting out, which meant there was a standing relationship of professional goodwill between them. "I need a favor," James said when Marcus picked up. "You have good timing," Marcus said. He had a dry, amused voice. "We just lost a mid-level designer to a startup in San Francisco. What's the favor?" James told him. He sent Marcus the portfolio link. He waited. There was a pause on the line that James knew well, the pause of someone looking at something they hadn't expected to find. "Where is she now?" Marcus asked. "Forge Creative." Another pause. "Is she being used there?" "From what I can tell, no." Marcus made a sound that was not quite a word. "I'll have someone reach out to her. No guarantees, James. I'm not going to hire someone as a favor to you." "I know that," James said. "I just want her to get the meeting." "Fine," Marcus said. "I'll look properly. If she's as good as this looks, she should have been in my door 2 years ago." "That's all I'm asking," James said. He hung up the phone. He sat back in his chair and looked out at Chicago spread below him, the lake flat and gray in the October afternoon. He thought about a woman crouching down on a cold sidewalk to talk to a frightened child when hundreds of people had walked past. He thought about her voice, that low, calm voice, and the way Eli had taken her hand without hesitation, which Eli did not do with strangers. He thought about the grilled cheese. He didn't examine why he was thinking about these things. He had a tendency, when he noticed himself examining something too closely, to simply do the practical thing and move on. He picked up his next call.
Maya had been having the kind of week that makes you feel like the universe has a personal grievance against you. The promotion she'd been passed over for 3 months ago had been given officially, permanently, with a plaque and everything, to Kyle. Kyle, who was 24 and had the confidence of someone who had never once doubted his own talent and whose work Maya felt, in the private, ungracious part of herself she tried to keep quiet, was competent at best. She had smiled at the announcement, she had said congratulations, she had gone home that evening and eaten an entire bowl of pasta standing over the kitchen sink and felt something that wasn't quite sadness but was in the same neighborhood. She had been making the pro-con list again, the quit the job list, the freelance list, the what am I actually doing with my life list. She was 3 columns into a spreadsheet she had created called Financial Realism, which was what she named all the spreadsheets she created when she was upset because naming them seriously made her feel like she was doing something productive when her phone rang. The number was local, but not one she recognized. Maya Osei? The voice was a woman's, crisp, professional, warm in that particular way of someone who is good at their job. "Speaking," Maya said. "My name is Diana Chang. I'm the talent director at Webb and Associates. I'm hoping you have a few minutes." Maya's brain went very still. Webb and Associates? She knew the name the way every working designer in Chicago knew the name, the way you know the name of something that exists at a different altitude than you, something you acknowledge without ever really expecting to reach. She had looked at their work for years. She had studied it, the way you study things you love and find intimidating in equal measure. "I do," Maya said. Her voice came out normal. She was proud of that. "We've had the chance to look at your portfolio," Diana said. "We're quite impressed. We have a senior designer position open. It's a recent opening, and I'd love to set up a conversation with our creative director, Marcus Webb, at your earliest convenience." Maya sat very still at her kitchen table with the spreadsheet open in front of her, and the pasta bowl in the sink, and the pro-con list on a notepad to her left. "How did you find my portfolio?" she asked, because she needed to know. She wasn't the kind of person who walked through an open door without looking at who had opened it. "We have a number of sources," Diana said pleasantly. "Your work has been getting some attention in the right circles." It hadn't been. Maya knew exactly how much attention her work was getting. She had a design website with respectable traffic and no extraordinary recent uptick. She had an Instagram for her work with about 1,200 followers, which was fine. Nothing had changed recently. "I appreciate the call," Maya said. "I'd love to come in." She spent the rest of the evening trying not to spiral. She made more tea than she needed. She looked at Webb & Associates' website for the 6th time in her adult life. She texted her best friend, Adaze, the entire story in a series of increasingly capitalized messages. Adaze sent back a string of fire emojis and a voice note in which she said something primarily in Igbo that Maya's Twi-based upbringing didn't fully cover, but whose tone she understood completely. She did not connect it to the boy from the coffee shop. It didn't even occur to her. The offices of Webb & Associates were on the 14th floor of a building in River North that managed to feel both airy and serious. The kind of space that communicates, without saying anything, that the people inside take what they do very seriously and also believe that beautiful work requires beautiful surroundings. Maya arrived 8 minutes early, which she felt was the exact right amount of early. Early enough to be respectful, not so early as to be anxious-looking. She wore a dark green blazer over black trousers and her good earrings, 2 small gold hoops her mother had given her when she graduated. She had her portfolio on her laptop and a printed lookbook she had put together at midnight because she was constitutionally unable not to prepare. Marcus Webb turned out to be nothing she expected. She had expected someone austere, the creative director type, all studied nonchalance and cool appraisal. Marcus Webb was a broad-shouldered black man in his mid-40s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the warm, rumbling energy of someone who found people genuinely interesting. He had looked at her actual portfolio, not just the website, but the process documents she sent over, the concept iterations, the thinking behind the thinking. And he had questions. Real questions, the kind that told her he had actually looked. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. She had been prepared for 30. He showed her around the studio afterward. She met 3 other designers. She sat in on the end of a brief from a client she recognized, a major technology company whose visual identity she privately thought was extraordinary. When they shook hands at the end, Marcus said, "I'll be in touch by the end of the week." He was in touch by the end of the next day. The offer was, the number when she saw it required her to read it twice. It was more than double her current salary. It came with a title, Senior Designer. It came with a benefits package, a professional development allowance, and a line in the offer letter about creative autonomy that she read 4 times because she wanted to make sure she was reading it correctly. She called her mother. Grace Osei cried. Not the weeping kind, the particular African mother crying that sounds almost like laughter. The kind that is gratitude and pride compressed into something that tear ducts handle because there's nowhere else for it to go. "God is good," Grace said. "He is," Maya said, and meant it. Though she would have also said, if pressed, that she felt a lingering question about exactly how this had happened. She had not applied to Webb & Associates. She had not been featured anywhere unusual. She had done nothing different from what she had been doing for 2 years. Something had opened this door. She didn't know what. She accepted the offer. She gave her notice at Forge Creative. Derek Paulson looked mildly surprised, which was the most emotional reaction she had ever seen from him. Kyle did not seem to register the loss. Maya Osei started at Webb & Associates on the first Monday in November. Webb & Associates hosted a holiday party for clients and collaborators in the second week of December in the studio space after hours. Fairy lights and jazz and the kind of catering that suggested someone had thought about it carefully. Maya came in a burgundy dress she had owned for 3 years and only worn twice because it was the kind of dress that required an occasion. She was talking to a client, a kind museum curator named Eleanor, about materiality in exhibition design, when she felt, rather than saw, someone enter the room with the particular density of presence that some people have, the kind that shifts a room's atmosphere very slightly, the way a cold front does. She turned. James was standing at the door with his coat over one arm, talking to Marcus, who was laughing at something he'd said. He looked, she registered this with the cool appraisal she applied to everything, good. He wore things well. He was the kind of person for whom good clothing was not about performance, but about the same quiet precision he brought to everything else. He found her across the room before she had looked away. She turned back to Eleanor, who was still talking about exhibition design, and contributed 3 more sentences to the conversation before James crossed the room. Eleanor, it turned out, knew James, or knew of him. He was a donor to the museum board, which Maya had not known. They spoke briefly. Eleanor drifted away with the elegant social mobility of people who were comfortable at parties. James looked at her. "You didn't tell me you were coming," Maya said. "Marcus invited me," he said. "I almost didn't. I almost said I had other plans." "What changed your mind?" He considered this for a moment with the honest deliberation she had come to recognize as his particular mode. "I wanted to see you," he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. "James," she said, carefully, "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it clearly." "Okay," he said. "I like you. I think you know that. But I need you to understand that I am not a woman who can be in something where the balance is off. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about respect. I'm talking about being seen. I've spent 2 years being invisible in a job I was better than, and I left it and I built something, and I'm not going to walk into something else where I disappear again. Do you understand what I'm saying?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I understand exactly what you're saying." He paused. "And I want to tell you that the thing I find, the thing that has made me think about you every day since October, since a Tuesday evening in a coffee shop, is not something you're in danger of losing. It's the thing that made you stop." She looked at him. "You stopped," he said quietly, "when everyone else walked past. Not because of who I was or who Eli was. You stopped because there was a child who needed someone to stop. That is not a small thing, Maya. That is the kind of thing that tells you exactly who a person is." The jazz was playing something slow, and the fairy lights were very warm, and Eleanor, the curator, was across the room, saying something that made her companion laugh. Maya exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "I hear you." "Okay," he said. They stood there for a moment. "Do you want to get a drink?" she asked. He almost smiled. She was getting better at reading almost smiles. "Yes," he said. "The story does not accelerate into a sprint from here. That is important to say. This is not a fairy tale, not because fairy tales are wrong, but because Maya Osei was not and had never been a character in someone else's story. She was the main character of her own, and that meant things moved at her pace, which was careful and deliberate and thoroughly considered. They dated, if that was the word, for 7 months before anyone outside their immediate circles knew. They were not hiding, they were just private. Maya had a horror of the particular narrative that would attach itself to the story if it became public too soon. The designer and the billionaire, the classic narrative of a fairy tale dressed up in modern clothes. And she needed the thing between them to be real, to be tested by ordinary time before it became a story anyone else could tell. In those 7 months, she met Curtis, James's driver, who greeted her with the specific warmth of someone who associates her with the relief of a terrible evening resolved. She liked Curtis enormously. She met James's best friend of 30 years, a man named David Park, who was a civil rights attorney, and with whom she eventually had a 4-hour argument about the role of beauty in political movements that ended with David saying to James, in a private moment she was not meant to hear, "She's exactly what you need." She filed this away. She met Claire, Eli's mother, at a school event she attended because Eli had asked her to come, and she had decided, after some deliberation, that she wasn't going to be the kind of person who hesitated in the face of a direct invitation from an 8-year-old. Claire was gracious and warm, and looked at Maya with the assessing eyes of a woman who loves her child and is deciding whether this new person is trustworthy. By the end of the evening, Claire had given her the look, a brief, private look of approval that Maya understood without it needing to be articulated. James, for his part, started coming home for dinner. Not every night, he couldn't, and Maya would not have wanted him to reorganize his life on her behalf, but he started leaving the office earlier. He started keeping the dinners. When Eli asked if they could have pizza on Fridays and invite Maya, James started calling Maya on Fridays. The change in him was not dramatic. It was the kind of change that happens beneath the surface first and only shows at the edges, the way a river changes course over years, imperceptibly, until one day you realize the water is going somewhere it wasn't before. Maya watched him learn to sit in the parts of his life that weren't work. She watched him once at Eli's school play. Eli had a small part as a tree, which he performed with extraordinary dignity, and the expression on James's face during those 4 minutes was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. She took his hand without thinking about it. He didn't look at her, he just turned his hand over and held hers. The story of how it became public was Eli's doing, indirectly. He had done a school project, a My Family presentation that second graders gave in March, and had included in the family portrait he drew 4 figures: himself, his father, his mother, and a woman with braids and a green blazer who was unmistakably Maya. His teacher had mentioned it to another parent. Another parent had posted something vague on social media. By the following week, a gossip column in a Chicago lifestyle publication had published a short item: "Is James Whitmore, Chicago's famous private equity billionaire, off the market? Sources close to the family suggest he's been seeing someone, not an heiress, not a socialite, but a designer." The press, discovering that James Whitmore's girlfriend was a graphic designer from the South Side, whose father drove a bus and whose mother cleaned offices, decided this was a story. Maya had 3 days of what she described to Adeze as the particular nightmare of being interesting to people who don't know you. She dealt with it by going to work, by being excellent at her job, by declining all interview requests and ignoring all speculation, by calling her mother, who had heard about the gossip column from the church WhatsApp group and who had said with complete serenity, "You know who you are, Maya. Don't let anyone else tell you." James offered to issue a statement on her behalf. She told him not to. "This is not your thing to manage." Not unkindly, clearly. He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said, "but you want to fix it. That's a good quality in a person, but let me handle my own things." "Okay," he said. She handled it. The coverage died within 2 weeks, as coverage always does when the subject refuses to perform. Here is what Maya Osei built in the 2 years following October, and this matters because stories like this one are often told as if the woman's life is a backdrop to someone else's generosity, and that is not what happened. She designed the visual identity for the museum. The rebrand was covered in 3 major design publications. Marcus Webb gave her the lead role on a second project, the brand identity for a new wing of a contemporary art space in New York, and flew her to New York for the pitch, which they won. She was promoted to associate creative director before her 18th month at the firm. She hired 2 junior designers who were, she had decided, good and being wasted somewhere smaller. She gave a talk at a design conference in Atlanta, Making the Invisible Visible, Design as Quiet Advocacy, that was later written up in a design journal and that she later turned with great reluctance and much encouragement from Marcus and James and Adeze and her mother into an essay that was published in a design anthology. She started mentoring 2 young designers from the South Side through a nonprofit program. She chose them from the South Side deliberately because she remembered being a young designer from the South Side who had nobody to tell her that she was right about her own talent.
She saved enough money to buy her parents' mortgage out from under them, not the house, which was theirs and had always been theirs, but the debt. She did it on a Thursday morning in March and didn't tell them until Friday evening when she went over for dinner, and when her mother understood what had happened, Grace Osei did the specific African mother crying again, the grateful, overwhelmed kind, and held her Maya's face in both hands the way James had held Eli's face in the coffee shop, and Maya thought about that moment, the recognition of something safe, and understood it for the first time.
James Whitmore understood, in the second year of knowing Maya, something that he had not been able to understand before, not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of the right vantage point. He understood the difference between building something and being somewhere. He had spent 15 years building his firm, his reputation, his son's future, his parents' legacy. He had been extraordinary at it. It had produced results that were, by any measurable standard, remarkable. And it had also produced a life that was, despite all its external abundance, somewhat thin in the places that matter most to people when the meeting is over and the light changes, and you are sitting in a room with only yourself. Maya did not tell him this. She showed him, by example, the particular texture of a life that is also present, that notices things, that stops for things, that sits in the parts of the day that can't be optimized. She showed him by the way she was with Eli, not trying to be his mother, not trying to be his friend, but something specific and valuable and hers. Someone who took him seriously, who asked him questions and waited for the real answer, who brought him, on his birthday, not an expensive gift, but a sketchbook and a set of drawing pencils because she had noticed, months earlier, that he stopped whenever he saw street art. Eli, upon receiving the sketchbook, had looked at it for a long moment, and then looked at her and said, "How did you know?" "I was paying attention," she said. He had looked at his father. "You see," the look said, "this is how it's done." James had laughed, a real one, the complete kind. Almost exactly 2 years after a Tuesday evening in October, Maya Osei is sitting on the bench outside the building on Michigan Avenue that holds Webb & Associates on the 14th floor and Whitmore Capital on the 47th. It is October again. The sky is the same between gray and blue. The wind has the same bite. The street is full of the same people going home. She is eating a sandwich, the same lunch habit. She has a new canvas tote, the same earphones. She is thinking about a color palette, specifically a deep blue she can't quite get right, and the way late autumn Chicago light makes blues look different than they do on screen. A man sits down on the other end of the bench. She glances up. James, with no coat, which means he has come down in a hurry from whatever meeting he was in. He has a coffee, black, from the machine on the 47th floor, which she has told him several times is a crime against coffee. He looks like what he always looks like, precise, contained, a little tired in the way of someone who has been running at full speed for many years and is slowly, deliberately learning to vary the pace. "You forgot your coat," she says, without looking up from her lunch. "I'll survive," he says. "You'll be cold." "I'll be fine." She looks at him. He looks at her. "How's the blue?" he asks. "Wrong," she says. "I don't know why." "Is it reading too cold?" She considers this. "Maybe, or too deep. I can't tell yet." "Sometimes you need to look at it with different light." "I know that," she says, slightly amused. "I'm the designer." "I'm just contributing." "You're bothering me on my lunch break." "Also that," he agrees. Across the street, a street artist, different from the one Eli had stopped to look at 2 years ago, but doing the same kind of work, chalk portraits on the pavement, is drawing something. A few people have slowed to watch. One person has stopped completely. A small girl, maybe 6, in a yellow coat, standing absolutely still at the edge of the drawing with her mouth slightly open, watching the artist work. Her mother is a few feet back, checking her phone. The girl is transfixed, caught in that specific pure attention that children bring to things that surprise them with their beauty. Maya watches the girl. She thinks about Eli 2 years ago, stopping for a chalk artist and the particular 8-year-old logic of it.
The world is full of interesting things, and when you find one, you stop. It is adults who have learned not to stop. It is adults who have decided there is always somewhere more important to be. She had stopped, not because she was special or heroic or had some gift of goodness that other people lacked. She had stopped because she was tired and preoccupied, and somewhere in the complicated machinery of her own life, she had retained the ability to notice something outside of herself. That was all. That was the thing. A Tuesday evening, a cold sidewalk, a child who needed someone to stop. And from that one small decision, not a grand gesture, not a sacrifice, not even a particularly remarkable act of kindness, everything had followed. The door Marcus Webb opened, the work she had built inside that door, the man sitting beside her now with a bad coffee, slightly cold, watching Chicago go past. She had not needed to be rescued. That was never the story. The story was simpler than that. The story was that kindness is not a diminishing resource, that it does not cost you yourself to give it, that the people who stop, who actually stop in a world designed to keep everyone moving, are not saints or heroes. They are just people who have kept some essential part of their attention pointed outward, toward the world, toward the possibility that someone, somewhere, might need exactly what you have to give, which is sometimes nothing more elaborate than presence. The girl in the yellow coat reaches out and touches the chalk drawing very gently with one finger. The artist looks up and smiles. The girl's mother, glancing up from her phone, smiles too. Maya finishes her sandwich. She crumbles the wrapper. "Walk back up with me?" she says. James stands, brushing off his trousers. He hands her the bad coffee. She takes it out of habit and takes a sip and makes a face, and they start back toward the building. "The blue," James says as they walk. "What if it's not the color? What if it's the context? Sometimes the thing that reads wrong is right in a different setting." She thinks about this. Maybe. She thinks about a coffee shop, amber lit on a Tuesday evening. She thinks about a small boy's gray eyes and a manager named Pat and a grilled cheese sandwich and the specific quality of choosing to notice. Context, she thinks. Everything depends on context. She holds the door open for him. He would have held it for her, but she's faster. And he steps through, and she follows, and the door closes on the October street and the chalk art and the girl in the yellow coat who is still standing there, still watching, not yet ready to move on.